Okay, so let me resume this presentation number 10, in which I try to discuss the question: who has to revise which theories? Those who advocate to decolonize criminology, to decolonize social sciences, or those who are critiqued by this notion of decolonization. This is what this presentation is about. And let me again, I think this is better, and read that quotation a third time. I'm sorry that I'm not able to show it, so I better read it again. Again, decolonization criminology does not assume that indigenous societies were a paradise of tranquility before they were conquered and colonized, nor that decolonization would usher in a crime-free society. Rather, decolonization is a matter of social justice under the assumption that the invasion, kidnapping, enslavement, and mass murder of indigenous people represent organized crimes against humanity, and so decolonization should be at the core of criminological theory rather than be ignored, excluded, or relegated to the margins. I argue that it is in the interest of humanity and of criminologists to decolonize the entire world and the discipline of criminology, because it is dangerous for any discipline to evade major developments that are relevant to the core subjects of the discipline, especially when we are talking about threats to humanity. So, as I said before, decolonization creates a unity of humanity, gathering everybody and everything, disregarding any differences, conflicts, contradictions, etc., among all these subjects, and embraces them all in this moral notion of humanity. And they agitate Western thinkers to join this moral entity by confessing that the violence of the imperial states against the colonized world was a crime, must be considered as a crime. They motivate the Western, as they call them, social scientists, to join this club called humanity. They motivate these Western scientists that only if they confess, if they consider the violence of the colonialists against the colonized people as a crime, that only by doing it they gain the moral authority to deal with, as he phrases it, the future threats of humanity. So decolonizing thinking about the world offers those who were the colonizers and who are the imperialists of today to amend their moral status in front of the future threats of humanities they are facing. And what are the future threats of humanity this decolonized thinker is thinking of? He knows very well that it is the very Western world he wants to embrace in the world big family of humanism. He knows very well that it is these very imperialists who use this moral value to justify all their military actions against anybody they consider as their enemy, as they justified when they were dealing the colonized world with all the phenomena he describes: invasion, kidnapping, enslavement, and mass murder. All these activities were carried out by the imperialists in the name of humanity. And how this guy argues is to say, you cannot justify any threats of humanity if you don't distance yourself not from what you are doing today and not from what you are going to do in the future with what you call threats of humanity. You can do that only if you improve your moral status by joining the project, the philosophy of decolonization. Only if you distance yourself from the violence you executed against the colonial world in front of those people who also have become members of the same society that the colonizers have and had, only if you confess in front of these new societies, the former colonies, that the way you treated them, not today, but in the past, that was bad, that this was against social justice, against humanity. Only then you can justify the threats of humanity in the future with a clean morality. So, the project of decolonization tries to persuade the Western social sciences and, as he phrases it, the entire world to amend their moral status by condemning violence they executed in the past in order to have the moral image for any activities. He doesn't say what he means by that, but it is not such a secret to understand what he is referring to carry out these activities against any one who is considered as a threat for humanity against humanity today. It is not so difficult. If you look at the Western propaganda today, who they consider as people who are threatening the values of humanity. And it is also not so difficult to notice that it is this very Western world which considers itself as that part of the world that is entitled to defend the values of humanity. Nobody knows that better than the people from the colonized world, because they were actually the ones who experienced during the period of colonization that what he describes as invasion, kidnapping, enslavement, and mass murder, that all this was also justified by the colonizers as an activity on behalf of humanity against the uncivilized world. Decolonized thinking underlines its suggestion, its offer to Western thinkers to improve their moral status by confessing that they have done any crime in the past, that their colonial activities against the colonies, not today, against what they did against the colonies, that this was violating the social justice of humanity. This implies, to say this more explicitly, that they try to say in a very diplomatic way that what happens today by the imperial world in relation to the former colonized world is not a matter of their critique. That is all accepted. Otherwise, they wouldn't invite the imperialists into the big family of humanity. Decolonization wants to argue that you have to clean your moral account in order to use your moral account for future activities against any people you consider as your enemy. And this is not enough. There is a little notion in this quotation. I want to read again, not the whole one, don't worry. Only this one I want to say just a few words, finishing this first part of my presentation. What he is saying there is this. It's the first sentence. Decolonization criminology does not assume that indigenous societies were a paradise. A paradise of tranquility, he is saying. Before they were conquered and colonized, nor that decolonization would usher in a crime-free society. What I'm referring to is this notion of paradise. What he is saying is indigenous societies before they were conquered by the imperialists. These societies were no paradise. Rejecting the idea societies not under the control, under the rule of capitalism. Rejecting the argument that these societies, because they were not oppressed by capitalism, they were no paradise, is a remarkable little note. Why that? It was throughout the history of the critique of capitalism that Western propagandists, the propagandists of capitalism, accused any criticism of capitalism as being naive, stupid, without any knowledge about mankind. Why? Because they argued that people criticizing capitalism were making up the illusion that there could be any society that was like a paradise. This is not what any Marxist ever said, that they are going to create paradise. Paradise is a notion that comes from Christians. And it is quite remarkable that these Christian people argue with the realism humans must have in order to reject any critique of politics which oppress people. Their argument is people are bad. People are evil. So they need a power that controls and, if necessary, oppresses them. And anybody who promises or only has the view, the idea, that it was a particular society system, capitalism, that creates the oppression of people makes a big mistake, because this critique of capitalism argues with a naive, a silly, a stupid illusion, revealing that they don't understand the nature of humans, which is bad. This is the typical Christian view of people. Very nicely used by people who want to criticize critiques of capitalism. And again, they say, who plays with the idea that after capitalism, abolishing capitalism, leads to paradise is a silly idiot, and nobody should believe in this critique. This is how, not only here and there, but since the existence of capitalism, all critiques of the critics of capitalism, this is the way they denounced critics of capitalism as being naive idiots, not knowing the nature of humans. And again, this criminologist is saying, I am not so naive. I am not so naive to say that the societies, the indigenous societies before colonization, were paradise. So what he is saying by this is exactly this. We criminologists, may they be advocating decolonization, or may they be criminologists we are trying to persuade to join our project of decolonization. Whatever, we all know that there is no paradise in this world, because humans are bad and need, guess what? Criminologists. Criminologists who deal across all the different societies, disregarding the nature of these societies. Always humans need criminology. And what he wants to say is that he joins the critique of Marxists. He joins the critique of anti-Marxists, I have to say, accusing them of having the illusion they never had, that after capitalism there is the paradise, and since this is a promise nobody should believe in, the argument is, don't be so silly and follow these silly Marxists. This brings me to the next point, which is discussing the question, what is requested from the Western social sciences when they are asked to decolonize their thinking. What do they have to change to join this philosophy of decolonized criminology? What do they have to do? regarding their theories? Nothing. They can just continue to do whatever they did. What they have to do is to join the big family of decolonized thinkers is this. They have to say that they consider the history of the colonized world, what the Western world has done to them, that this was a crime. Which means they don't have to revise any theory about today. They don't have to even revise any theory about yesterday, about colonialism. The only thing they have to do is they have to change their view and say that the way the colonized world treated the colonizers treated the colonized world, that was bad. A moral verdict of what has happened. And that's not so difficult. You can just say that. At this point, let me quickly report about a most recent activity. The French president, Monsieur Macron, went to Africa. He went to Rwanda. And believe it or not, he is a member of the big club of humanity, of decolonized humanity. What did he do? He went to Africa. He admitted that France played a problematic role in the mass murder of this genocide in Rwanda, and discussed before, a few months before, or maybe only a month before, on a big gathering of African leaders in Paris, that France should increase its influence in Africa. That's how it works. He understood, our criminologist. If you want to pull the former colonized world on the side of today's imperialists to deal with the threat of humanity, as our criminologist calls it, our propagandists of decolonization thinking, then you just have to go to people in Africa and tell them, sorry, that was bad. Please join our activities against the threat of humanity. And I don't need to tell anybody what could be all defined as a threat of humanity. And everybody knows People from Africa knows this better than anybody else, that anything in the world that doesn't suit into the policy agenda of the West is presented as a threat of humanity, and once it's presented as a threat of humanity, it justifies everything. Everything. Because this condemning something as a threat of humanity, not any crime, not any political agenda, not any political view, not any of this kind of small thing, it is this gigantic verdict if something is described, denounced as a threat for humanity. And with this, it entitles the subject, Macron in this case, la grande nation, it entitles them to do whatever is necessary in the name of humanity. And I don't need to tell anybody the places around the world, the number of bombs, the destruction. Nobody knows this better than the people in Africa. Justified with a threat against humanity. So, back to the social scientists and their decolonization. Macron understood the lecture, and the Western social sciences as well. Because, firstly, nobody criticized ever. No decolonization propagandist criticizes any theory. What they are arguing for is just this little confession that colonialism was bad. Colonialism, nothing about today. Nothing about today. And by doing this, everything these people write and do today is not a matter of this confession about anything that was critical. It is all in the past. So with this wonderful confession of having done anything in the past, everything these people do today is okay. More than that, with this confession, colonialism, that was really a crime against social justice and humanity. With this confession, you can write and think and publish anything you want to publish, given that you connect it with this philosophy of decolonization. If you do that, you are even allowed to decorate whatever you say with the label of being a critical thinker. So, decolonization has become a fashion in the West. It has become a fashion because it provides you with the moral attitude that you are a critical thinker because you condemn the colonial past. And thanks to doing that, you can do whatever you want and write today and are considered as a critical person acting on behalf of the values of mankind. I want to stop here again before I come to the next point. And my next point is to raise the question, how about the people who are advocating this decolonization? The people criticized by this notion of decolonizing, the Western social scientists, they, as I just tried to say, don't have to change anything. They continue doing whatever they did. And my next question will be, how about those who advocate decolonization thinking? What and how are they revising their way of thinking and their theories?